Hey, ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Brescher here. Today, our goal is to be able to identify the opposite of any integer. We will also learn about absolute value, what it means, and how to find the absolute value of a number. First, we need to understand some academic vocabulary terms, like the word integer here. Integer includes all positive and negative whole numbers and the number 0. And it can be represented, or we can use an integer to represent different real world situations. Here we see a scuba diver, and a scuba diver, if he's below sea level or below water level, could represent a negative value. You may have also thought of an example like below 0 for the temperature, a negative value, or even having debt where you owe a certain amount of money. All of those could be represented by a positive or negative number. And if it is a positive or negative whole number, we call it an integer. Now, we need to understand what the opposite of a number is. And the opposite of a number, or numbers are opposites when they are the same distance from 0 on the number line. So if we look up and we have an example here, and I'm going to write this with white here, the number 8 right here, if I graph the number 8, we can see that it's actually a distance of 8 units from 0. This would be 8. Well, its opposite would be the number in the opposite direction that is that same distance from 0. And that would actually be negative 8. Because negative 8 is, again, 8 units from 0 in the opposite direction. Alright? Next definition that we're going to look at, or academic vocabulary term, is absolute value. Now, by definition, absolute value is a number's distance from 0 on a number line. So, back to our example of opposites. If we look up on this number line again, and we want to find the absolute value of, I'm going to say, negative 4, well, we want to find its distance to 0. And we would say the distance here to 0 is actually 4 units. Okay. And even though it's a negative 4, distance is always going to be a positive value. So negative 4, the absolute value of negative 4 is equal to 4. Okay. And we have some examples. This is how we'd actually write absolute value. These bars over here mean the absolute value of and whatever's contained within those. Always simplify it down if there's an actual operation in here or something that you have to solve or simplify, like an expression. Simplify it first and then find the absolute value. So we want to know the distance that 8 is from 0. And it is 8 units. Now, what would the distance of negative 8 be? That's right, it would also be 8 units. Notice they're both positive because distance is always positive. Moving right along. Here we have a problem. Graph 3 on the number line, then graph the opposite of 3. What do you notice about the absolute values of these two numbers? Explain. So first we're going to start out and we're going to go ahead and graph these, okay? I'm going to use a light blue this time. I'm going to do 3 and the opposite of 3. So click over here for now. The number 3 is going to be halfway between 2 and 4, so I would put it right here. And I might even just label it, and I'm going to go ahead and label it 3. Now the opposite is going to be the same distance from 0, but in the opposite direction. So halfway between negative 2 and negative 4 would be a negative 3. Now, what do we notice about the absolute value? Well, what is the absolute value, or distance to 0, for 3? That's right, it's equal to 3. So the absolute value here is 3. And what is the absolute value of negative 3? Well, if we move this number line over, and if this number line were drawn perfectly to scale, it would fit right there because it has the same distance to 0, and that by definition is what an opposite is, in the opposite direction. So the absolute values are equivalent. Next one, graph 6.5 on the number line, then graph the opposite of 6.5. Well, the first thing we're going to have to do is figure out where 6.5 is located. Halfway between 6 and 8 would be, that's right, 7. And 6.5 would be halfway between 6 and 7. So we're kind of breaking it down into parts. So halfway between here, this is about where 6.5 would be. And I'm going to go ahead and label that 6 5/10. Okay? And now I need to graph its opposite. So I'm going to go halfway between 6 and 8, or excuse me, negative 6 and negative 8. This is halfway between, so this would be negative 7. And in order to find negative 6.5, it's going to be halfway between negative 6 and negative 7, which is going to be right about here. Okay, and we would label that as 6.5. And then, just so we're not confused on which point we're talking about, I'm going to go ahead and remove those other ones and erase. What do you notice? Once again, ooh, I did notice that I forgot to put my negative sign here. Once again, you can tell that these are both 6.5 units from 0. So the distance from 0 is the same, which means their absolute values are the same. So a number and its opposite have the same absolute values. Here's our last one. So we have a real-world example. A scuba diver is swimming near the bottom of a pool that is 10 feet deep. What integer would represent the position of the scuba diver? Okay. And right here, it looks like he's near the bottom. It looks like he's at negative 8 feet, or the integer would be negative 8. How far did the far did the scuba diver have to dive or swim down? Well, if water level represents the 0, he still had to swim down 8 feet. Remember, distance is always positive. So the integer might be negative 8 that represents his location, but in this case, the distance from 0 is 8 feet, and that is the distance the diver had to swim. Well, I hope this helped you out with understanding absolute value and opposites of numbers. See ya!